Javier Bardem just took on one of the most terrifying villains in movie history. And he didn't just copy Robert De Niro's version. Apple TV's new Cape Fear rewrites the rulebook on this story, and some of the changes are so bold, they completely flip what longtime fans expect. Today, we're breaking down exactly what this new take on Cady does differently, why those choices matter, and what they reveal about where this story is headed. Stick around, because the ending of this series is going to surprise a lot of people who think they already know this tale. Let's set the stage first. Cape Fear isn't a new story. It started as a novel called The Executioners, written by John D. MacDonald. Then it became a 1962 film starring Gregory Peck. Then, in 1991, Martin Scorsese turned it into one of the most unforgettable thrillers of the decade, with Robert De Niro playing Cady as a walking nightmare. That version is still considered one of the greatest horror remakes ever made. So when Apple TV announced they were turning this into a 10-episode series, with Scorsese himself producing, the pressure was enormous. You don't remake perfection, you have to reinvent it. And that's exactly what showrunner Nick and Tosca did. This series premiered on June 5, 2026, with new episodes rolling out weekly through the end of July. It currently sits at 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, with critics praising Bardem's performance specifically for its manic, unpredictable energy. NPR called it riveting, but not every critic loved the expansion. The Hollywood Reporter argued the show stretches its story 4 hours longer than it probably needed to, calling out subplots like a true crime podcast and a microdosing storyline as filler that doesn't always earn its runtime. That's worth keeping in mind as we go through these changes, because more isn't always better. Sometimes it just means more time to get something wrong. But in this case, most of the additions actually serve a purpose. Let's get into them. First, the opening. Scorsese's 1991 version has one of the most iconic openings in horror movie history. Minimal dialogue, unsettling visuals, and De Niro's presence alone doing all the heavy lifting. If Apple TV tried to copy that shot for shot, it would have been a disaster. Instead, they did something smarter. The series opens with a barbecue at the Bowden family home, shot in this striking high-contrast infrared style, while Bernard Herrmann's original 1962 score plays underneath. That's not an accident. It's a direct nod to both previous versions at once, without trying to recreate either one. Cady's release from prison gets chopped up and scattered through the episode instead in flashes, rather than front-loaded as one big statement. It's a quieter way to build dread, and honestly, for a series with 10 hours to fill, that patience works in its favor. Now here's where things get genuinely different. In both movies, there's no other woman in Cady's life. He's alone, obsessive, focused entirely on revenge. In this series, Cady has a mistress, and she's the reason the entire plot exists. Before we even meet Cady on screen, we watch this woman write a confession admitting that she committed the crimes Cady was convicted for, and then take her own life. That confession is what gets him released. Think about what that does structurally. The movies start with Cady already free, already dangerous, already in motion. This show starts with a mystery. Why was an innocent man locked up? What does that confession actually mean? It reframes Cady, at least initially, as someone who might have a legitimate grievance, before the show slowly reveals just how much of a monster he really is. Location changes matter too, and this one's subtle, but interesting for anyone who's read the source material. The Bowden family here lives in Savannah, Georgia. In Scorsese's film, they live in a fictional town called New Essex, North Carolina. The 1962 original just said Southeast Georgia. So this new series is actually pulling closer to the original book and film than the 1991 movie did. It's a small detail, but it tells you this adaptation isn't just remaking the Scorsese version. It's pulling from multiple sources and picking what serves the new story best. Now let's talk about the Bowden family itself, because this is where the show makes its boldest structural choice. In both movies, Sam Bowden is the central figure. He's the father, the protector, the one Cady is targeting through his family. His wife and daughter are basically there to be endangered. In this series, that entire dynamic gets rebuilt. Anna Bowden, played by Amy Adams, is the one Cady is after because she's the defense attorney who effectively sabotaged his own case. Her husband, Tom, played by Patrick Wilson, was actually the prosecutor who convicted Cady in the first place. Let that sink in for a second. Two lawyers on opposite sides of the same murder trial. They end up together, and the man they both helped put away comes back years later to destroy both of them at once. That's a genuinely clever piece of plotting, because it doubles Cady's motivation without needing a second villain. He's not just angry at one person who wronged him. He's angry at the two people who built the case against him and then fell in love doing it. It also adds a layer most people won't clock right away. Tom isn't the biological father of Anna's daughter Natalie. So even inside this marriage, there's tension and complexity that didn't exist in either film. And then there's Zack. This character doesn't exist anywhere in the source material. Not the book, not either movie. He's the Bowden's teenage son, and he's given a real arc here, a strained relationship with his father, a sense of being overlooked in his own family. And in a move that genuinely upends expectations, if you know the classic story, Zack appears to become Cady's first target, not his sister. In the original films, it's the daughter who's put in the most immediate danger. Flipping that here means longtime fans watching this expecting a familiar rhythm get thrown off balance almost immediately. That's smart writing. You can't lean on nostalgia if you keep breaking the pattern people expect. Zack's storyline also does something the movies literally could not have done, because it didn't exist yet when they were made. He becomes the target of online grooming through his favorite video game. If that sounds uncomfortably familiar, it should. It's clearly drawing on real-world controversies around platforms like Roblox and the ongoing conversation about predators using online gaming spaces to target kids. That's a genuinely modern horror the original Cape Fear could never touch, because Max Cady in 1991 only had the physical world to work with. Here, he can reach into a teenager's bedroom through a screen without ever leaving his apartment. The show also uses viral videos of the Bowden family's reactions to Cady's release as another form of digital torment, which says something bigger about how public any personal crisis becomes now. Your worst day can end up as content within hours. That's not a Cape Fear problem. That's just modern life. And the show is smart enough to weaponize it. Here's a change that quietly reshapes the entire tone of the story. In the movies, Max Cady is convicted as a sexual predator. That's the core of what makes De Niro's version so unsettling. The constant, specific threat he poses to Sam Bowden's wife and daughter. In this series, Cady's crime is different. He stabbed his pregnant wife to death, killing their unborn child too. It's not a sexually motivated crime. It's an act of extreme domestic violence. Why does this matter so much? Because it changes what kind of monster we're watching. The 1991 version is horror rooted in predation, in a specific and deeply personal violation. This version is horror rooted in unchecked rage and the capacity for violence against the people closest to you. Combine that with the earlier reveal about his mistress confessing to those exact murders, and you've got a much murkier moral setup than either film ever attempted. Was Cady actually guilty? Is his mistress's confession true, or coerced, or was something else entirely? The movies never asked you to question whether Cady deserved his conviction. This show does. And that ambiguity, whether you love it or hate it, is genuinely new territory for this story. But let's talk about Bardem's Cady specifically for a second, because the physical details matter here too. In episode 2, we get a good look at his tattoos, which echo De Niro's iconic ink from the 1991 film, but with a key difference. De Niro's Cady has a crucifix holding scales labeled truth and justice. Bardem's version has the Grim Reaper wielding a scythe across his back. That's not a small stylistic swap. De Niro's tattoo is almost darkly ironic, a killer invoking justice and religion. Bardem's is far more blunt. There's no irony there, no twisted moral posturing, just death presented plainly. It tells you something about how this version of the character sees himself, not as a man with a warped sense of righteousness, but simply as an agent of inevitable consequence. There's also a fun connection to the original films worth mentioning, since it made headlines after episode 12 aired. Juliette Lewis, who played the Bowden daughter in the 1991 movie, shows up in a surprise cameo. Francesca Scorsese, Martin Scorsese's daughter, also appears. It's a nice reminder that even as this adaptation reshapes nearly everything about the story, the people involved clearly have real reverence for what came before. So where does all of this leave us? This isn't a simple remake stretched out to fill 10 hours. It's closer to a reinterpretation that uses the bones of Cape Fear, the tension, the family under siege, the unstoppable villain, and builds an almost entirely different psychological structure around them. Gender-swapped protagonists, a morally ambiguous inciting crime, a teenage son instead of a daughter as the primary target, and modern digital horror layered on top of classic revenge thriller mechanics. Some of it works better than others. The critical consensus so far suggests the performances, especially Bardem's, are carrying a story that occasionally gets lost in its own expanded runtime. But here's the real question hanging over the back half of this season, since we're only through the first 8 episodes as reviews have gone out. If Cady's crime isn't the sexual predation the movies built their horror around, what is this final confrontation actually going to be about? Is it revenge for a wrongful conviction? Is it something darker that his mistress's confession was covering up? The show has spent its entire first half building ambiguity instead of certainty, and that's a genuinely risky bet for a story this iconic. It means the payoff needs to stick the landing in a way the movies never had to worry about, because everyone already knew exactly what kind of monster max Cady was going in. We'll be covering the final episodes as they drop, especially once we get answers about that confession and where Zack's storyline ends up. If you've been watching this series and have thoughts on whether the changes actually improve the story or just complicate it for the sake of complicating it, drop that in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time.